So last weekend at White Sands Buddhist Center, we observed Ulaambana, which is one of the main Buddhist holidays in Vietnam. The central activity of an Ulaambana service is what we call feeding the hungry spirits, or ghosts as he called them, or sometimes you'll see it translated as the hungry shades. So when someone lives a life consumed by greed and craving for addictions or things like that, then when they pass away, they may become a hungry ghost. That's the idea here. And these are spirits who live in a lower realm, kind of a lower realm unique to them. And as Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh explained, they have tiny, tiny mouths and long, thin throats. So it's very hard for them to eat. And they have cavernous bellies that are hard to fill. So they can never get enough. And to make things worse, whenever they try to eat, their food turns to something disgusting, unless they are receiving the food as an offering from someone devout. So you don't have to believe that this is literally true, but it's a useful spiritual practice. We can learn to recognize that giving ourselves over to craving leads to a bad place. We can become the kind of person who, no matter how much we get, it's never enough. We can also recognize how others suffer because of their cravings, and we can vow to help them where we can and see how our own kindness can help us, but also help others who are less fortunate. So at White Sands, we actually have a Feeding the Hungry Ghosts ceremony as part of every Sunday service. But during this time of year, we do a special one just for that, for those ghosts who are in very dire circumstances, to help them transcend the realm in which they currently reside. That's the idea. So there's almost universal in different Buddhist traditions. There are periods of time sort of set aside for this. It kind of takes different forms in different traditions. And sometimes people will set aside anywhere from a few days to a few weeks to spend honoring their ancestors. So it's kind of interesting because on one hand you're recognizing the existence of hungry ghosts and you're developing kindness, the willingness to help those that you encounter, but also gratitude for your ancestors. And so the idea is that during this period of time, the gates of hell open on the first day of Ghost Month, and the ghosts can wander the world. And they can go to their former homes during this period. And so you'll see in some places they'll actually set a place at the table for their ancestors to come and sit with them. It's kind of like some of the things that you encounter in some Christian traditions, All Souls Day or a commemoration of the All Faithful Departed, and Halloween is kind of related to this idea. So while it's fairly universal in Buddhist cultures, this commemoration of departed ancestors happens at slightly different times from one place to another. So in Japan it's called Oban, and it falls in the middle of August. In China and Vietnam it varies a little bit because they use the lunar calendar. So we're right at the end of what they would call the Ulaambana season right now. The Ghost Month is just coming to an end. So regardless of what it's called or what day it falls on, this is an opportunity to practice gratitude toward our ancestors. The name of the observance, Ulaambana, is taken from the title of a sutra called the Ulaambana Sutra, in which the Buddha talks about how we might be able to repay our parents for the care that they gave us. And traditionally, this sutra supposedly appeared in India and then was translated in Chinese, but scholars looking into it say it's probably really composed in China around the 6th century Common Era. In any case, it's very profound, and so it's become an integral part of Buddhist practice in many places. So I'll tell you the story of the Ulaambana Sutra. It's not a real long story, but the Buddha had two key disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana. And so if you go to a lot of temples, you'll see a big golden statue of the Buddha, and then either side there's what looks like a monk sitting there. And those are Sariputta on his right, Moggallana on his left. Well, according to the Ulaambana Sutta, the Buddha and Sariputta and Moggallana were all staying at the same monastery. And Moggallana was a very advanced meditator, and he had developed some psychic powers. And so he decided, both his parents had passed away, and had been gone for a while, and so he decided that while he was there, he would try to determine what had happened to them. And so he used his psychic abilities and went looking for them, and he found his father in a heaven, like one of the Dewa realms, so sort of like an angel. But his mother was not there. And so he looked through the human realms and the animal realms, and finally started going through the hells, and he found her a hungry ghost living in a particularly bad place. Well, Moggallana's father had been quite wealthy, and Moggallana himself, before he became a monk, was pretty successful before he ordained. And so his mother had inherited all of this money, and unfortunately reacted to this kindness by becoming very greedy and stingy. And so in the next world, she was paying the price for her greed and her selfishness. And so she's sitting. Buddhists have the best hells. I think Dante learned about hell from reading Buddhist literature, probably. So she's sitting in the middle of a fire with a pot of boiling oil on her head. And she was just skin and bones because she had nothing to eat or drink. And so Moggallana wanted to offer something to her, so he prepared a bowl of rice for her to give her. Well, she took the bowl and she scooped up a handful of the rice, but before it could get into her mouth, it turned into burning coals. Well, Moggallana was overcome by sadness. So remember, usually hungry ghosts can accept things that are offered to them, but in this case, her karma was so bad that she couldn't even do that. So Moggallana went to the Buddha in tears, saying, "What can I do to help my mother?" And the Buddha said his mother's offenses were very deep. They went real deep. They were firmly rooted. And even though Moggallana's filial devotion was so profound that it resounded through heaven and earth, that all the heavenly spirits weren't enough to help him. The Buddha said the awesome spiritual power of the assembled Sangha, the Buddhas, monks, nuns, and lay supporters of the 10 directions, is necessary for her liberation. So when the Buddha was alive, his monks would, at the beginning of the rainy season, which roughly corresponds to our hurricane season, would find out where he was staying. And they would all go assemble there with him and spend the rains there, so about 3.5 months. And so for this period of time, they'd all be meditating together, listening to the Buddha talk about the Dharma and so on. And since all these monks would be there, a lot of lay Buddhists would come too, so hear Dharma talks and make offerings to the monks and all that kind of thing. And so there are all these exceptional people, some of them already completely enlightened themselves, would be doing all this good stuff all at once. So this would mean that there's a lot of merit, a lot of results of good karma being accumulated at that time. And so the Buddha said, wait until the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, when all those devout people are practicing together, and then make an offering on behalf of his ancestors. And he said, for the sake of 7 generations of ancestors, your current parents, those in distress, you should gather food for the 100 flavors and 5 kinds of fruit, basins for washing and rinsing, incense, oil lamps, and candles, all these things. Take the best stuff that you can get and place them in a bowl and offer it to the assembled monks, those of great virtue. And then he said that Moggallana's ancestors would then be able to move about and eat and dress themselves as if they were humans, freed from life as ghosts. So when the time came, the Buddha commanded all the assembled monks to recite mantras and vows for the sake of these donors' families, going back 7 generations. And after practicing meditation, the monks accepted the food, and at that instant, Moggallana's mother obtained liberation from suffering as a hungry ghost. Well, Moggallana was very happy about that. And so he asked the Buddha, what about other people? Could other followers do the same thing? And the Buddha said, yeah, he was very pleased with that question. He said any monks or lay followers could make offerings like this on behalf of their ancestors at this time of year. And their parents, if living, would have long, happy lives. And any departed ancestors going back 7 generations would benefit. And any who were hungry ghosts would transcend that existence and be reborn among the deities in a higher realm. And he said, while making those offerings and during this period, those disciples of the Buddha who practice filial devotion must in every moment of consciousness maintain the thought of their parents, including all 7 generations of ancestors. So that sounds like a big commitment, keeping your parents and ancestors in mind. But it's nice to have a time of year when you're grateful to parents and ancestors, because if you think about it, we owe them the ultimate debt. The Pali word for gratitude literally translates as knowing what has been done. So not only are our parents responsible for our lives, but when we look at what has been done by them on our behalf, it's pretty amazing. You know, the average infant goes through 4,000 diapers per year. So someone, most likely your mother, changed more than 4,000 of your dirty diapers in the first year of your life alone. Think about changing 4,000 diapers. And then how many meals did your mother and father prepare or otherwise provide for you before you started buying your own food? I figured it out one time. I think it's about 20,000. So think about it. If you had a friend who offered to take you out to lunch 20,000 times, you'd consider that a pretty good friend. Well, the Buddha considered gratitude for those who cared for us to be so important that he literally felt that one who was not thankful couldn't make spiritual progress. There's a sutra called the Katanyu Sutta, and he talks about the importance of that. He says there are 2 people who are not easy to repay, your mother and father. Even if you were to carry your mother on one shoulder and your father on the other shoulder for 100 years, you could not repay them. You were to establish them in absolute sovereignty over the entire earth, you would not repay your parents. So being grateful to your ancestors, though, goes beyond just your parents. You know, because for your parents to be there, their parents had to care for them and so on. And so that's this idea of the 7 ancestors. I don't know. I don't think I can. I don't know 7 ancestors back. Well, I've got one relative who did a lot of lineage stuff, and I think one little corner of the family tree we know how far back. But for me to be here talking to you today, my ancestors that many generations ago had to leave places like England and Ireland and come to a strange country and work to establish lives here. And no doubt your ancestors made similar efforts and sacrifices. So many Buddhists also include the importance of teachers and other significant people during this time. And that's important too. If you look closely at your life, you realize that you had help from many others with whatever you've accomplished. So at Ulambana ceremonies, people will make offerings to monks in temples, of course. Some will go for refuge and that kind of thing. But they'll dedicate merit to their ancestors and sometimes to their friends and relatives and teachers. So in Japanese Buddhism, I mentioned we observe Obon. And for several years, we've done Obon ceremonies at the prison. And the first time we did it, I realized this is going to be one of the most meaningful things we do here. Because we do a lot of chanting and we name bodhisattvas and teachers and that kind of thing. And so we do a lot of good things, you know. And then each of the inmates gets a piece of joss paper. Joss paper is a little piece of coarse paper that burns really at a low temperature, burns to ash completely. And some of them have pieces of gold imprinted on it. The idea is that, you know, you can burn it and offer it to somebody and they have gold to spend in the afterlife. But they get to write the names of their parents if they're deceased, ancestors, teachers that are important to them, even close friends who have died, and then it's burned. And in prison, you know, some of these guys have no contact with their families anymore. And loved ones had passed away and there was nothing they could do. They couldn't go to their funeral or memorial service or anything. And they've lost friends, sometimes friends that they met inside and passed away in other facilities. And, you know, they don't make a big deal about that at the prison. Somebody dies, then that's it. They're just gone. So there's no closure. And I've lost a number of friends and teachers and important people. And I can't imagine what it's like to have no way to acknowledge that and have any sense of closure. And so for many of them, it's their only chance to feel close to some of the people from whom they've been so completely separated. So if you wanted to repay your ancestors, you could make offerings on their behalf. You can feed the hungry ghosts if you want to. There's instructions available for that kind of ceremony if you can't go to a Buddhist temple. But anything charitable you do, you can do in the name of your parents and other ancestors. And then while we're celebrating our ancestors, spend some time recognizing the hungry ghosts we encounter. I was, during the COVID time, shortly after everything shut down, I was kind of doing what I could online, and I decided to firm up my association with a large international Zen community. And so they were doing a lot of online stuff. So I was attending some things. And one of the things I did was went to a service, an online service, at a big Zen center in California. And they were doing a Feeding the Hungry Ghost. And so I was there doing all the stuff with them, and they started the Feeding the Hungry Ghost thing. And they had someone, so this was a place where there are a lot of actors. And they had someone dress up like one of those Asian ghosts with the long stringy hair and everything, and kind of moving around the room, sort of looming at people and stuff. And at first I thought, well, that's clever. And then I thought, yeah, I'm not sure I like that. And then I started feeling really sad. And I'm going, okay, why am I feeling sad? And it occurred to me, if you have to put an actor in the room to portray hungry ghosts, you're probably not paying attention to the hungry ghosts right there with you. And so, you know, as Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh said, there's hungry ghosts everywhere. People who can't resist the pull of sensual desire, who are trying to fill their hearts that have not been filled by love from their society or love from their parents, or just through mindfulness and being aware of the reality they're in, trying to fill their hearts with some other way. And it might be drugs or alcohol or addictions to fame or status or anger, hatred, work, all those things that we become hooked on and that we use to try to fill up the empty space. So sometimes we might even see a hungry ghost in our own mirror if we look closely. So we can recognize those ghosts and make it a point to help them. The Buddha said we can do that by helping others to develop conviction, virtue, generosity, and discernment. And we can't give anybody else any of those characteristics, but if we develop those qualities in ourselves, then that's the same gift. We can learn the teachings, we can practice what we learn, so that we can spread the good influence of these lessons to others. So we can learn from recognizing our mother's love and compassion, how to have compassion and charitable lives, and then allowing the nurturing that we receive to spread in larger circles, to ripple throughout the world. And that way we can transform the goodness that we receive from our ancestors into goodness for all. And the sacrifices made on our behalf can benefit countless beings. So by way of a benediction, I'm going to share with you a short sutra, verses from a sutra called Hungry Shades Outside the Walls. Outside the walls they stand, and at crossroads, at doorposts they stand, returning to their old homes. But when a meal with plentiful food and drink is served, no one remembers them. Such is the karma of these living beings. Thus, those who feel sympathy for their departed relatives give timely donations of food and drink, exquisite, clean, thinking, may this be for our relatives, may our relatives be happy. And those who have gathered here, the assembled shades of the relatives, with appreciation give their blessing for the plentiful food and drink. For there in the ghost realm there is no farming, no commerce, no trading. They live on what is given here, hungry shades whose time here is done. As water raining on a hill flows down to the valley, even so does what is given here benefit them, and the merit you have acquired is not slight. We surround all people and all forms of life with love and compassion, Particularly, we send loving thoughts to those in suffering and sorrow, to those in doubt and ignorance, and to all who are striving to attain truth. May the infinite light of wisdom and compassion so shine within us that the errors and vanities of self may be dispelled. So shall we understand the changing nature of existence and awaken into spiritual peace. Thank you for your attention.